In 1966, the United States Air Force asked the Navy to reopen a production line that had been closed for nearly a decade. The aircraft they needed more of was not a supersonic interceptor. It was not a strategic bomber. It was a single-engine, propeller-driven attack plane, first flown in March of 1945, older than most of the pilots strapping into it. The Navy said no. The tooling for the Wright R-3350 engine no longer existed. So the Air Force fought the rest of the Vietnam War with a dwindling fleet of irreplaceable relics that could not be manufactured, could not be adequately maintained, and could not be replaced by anything the jet age had produced. By late 1972, they had literally run out of flyable airplanes. 266 were lost. 144 pilots were killed. The Douglas A-1 Skyraider saved more downed airmen than any aircraft in the war, and nobody could build another one. An F-4 Phantom arrives over a downed pilot's position at 450 knots. At that speed, the canopy below is a green blur, 2 seconds of jungle, maybe 3, then the aircraft is miles past and banking for another pass that will look exactly like the first one. The pilot on the ground, bleeding, hearing North Vietnamese Army sweeper teams crashing through the undergrowth, watches the Phantom's afterburners shrink to a point and disappear. The jet will be back. It will make another pass. It will not be able to see his signal mirror through triple canopy. It will not be able to put ordnance within a football field of friendly positions. And it cannot stay. This was the central failure of American air power in Vietnam's combat. Search and rescue mission. The fastest aircraft in the inventory were functionally useless for the job that mattered most, getting downed airmen out alive. F-105 Thunder Chiefs could flatten a grid square, but loitered for minutes, not hours. Their minimum safe distances from friendlies were so wide that a pilot trapped in close contact was on his own. Rescue helicopters, the HH-3E Jolly Green Giants, cruised at roughly 120 knots, completely unarmed against the gun positions, ringing any crash site the North Vietnamese Army had time to reach. And the North Vietnamese Army always had time, because the jets could not stay long enough to stop them. The math was brutal. In Korea, roughly 1 in 10 downed air crews was recovered. 9 out of 10 men who went down, stayed down, killed, captured, or simply never found. Lieutenant Colonel Richard T. Kite, the Air Rescue Service's first commander, had coined the motto that hung over every rescue unit in Southeast Asia: "These things we do that others may live." By 1964, the Air Force needed an aircraft that could loiter, escort, see, and kill, and the only machine in the inventory that could do all four was a propeller-driven relic older than most of the men who flew it. The answer was already parked on tarmacs across Southeast Asia. Every jet pilot looked down on it, until they needed it. The Douglas A-1 Skyraider was born from rejection. In June of 1944, the Navy told designer Ed Heinemann that his proposed dive torpedo bomber was too heavy and too complicated. Heinemann went back to his drafting table at Douglas Aircraft's El Segundo plant and redesigned the entire aircraft overnight. A single-engine, single-seat attack plane built around the biggest radial engine in American production. The XBT-2D1 first flew on the 18th of March, 1945. Douglas built 3,180 of them before the production line closed in February 1957. A decade later, when the Air Force desperately needed more, the Navy studied reopening the line and could not. The tooling for the Wright R-3350 engine no longer existed. The Air Force went to war in Vietnam with an aircraft it could no longer manufacture. What it could do, nothing else matched. The R-3350 was an 18-cylinder, twin-row radial, producing 2,700 horsepower, the same engine that had dragged B-29s to Tokyo, now bolted to a single-seat attack plane flying through small arms fire at treetop level. Its sound was unmistakable, not the scream of a jet, a deep, slow, throbbing bark that ground troops heard before they saw anything, and that downed pilots recognized the way a drowning man recognizes a rope. 8,000 pounds of ordnance hung across 15 hardpoints. That number deserves context. A B-17 Flying Fortress, 4 engines, 10 crew, the symbol of American strategic bombing, typically carried 4,000 to 6,000 pounds to Berlin. The Skyraider's routine combat load exceeded what a B-17 hauled across Nazi Germany. 1 seat, 1 engine, more bombs, and it stayed. 4 to 6 hours on station was standard, roughly 10 times what any jet could manage. Time to find a survivor, time to suppress fire around him, time to wait for the Jolly Green to assemble and arrive, time to do it again if the first pickup failed. 4 20mm M3 cannons with 200 rounds each gave it the firepower to make that time lethal. The A-1 could see muzzle flashes from its low, loitering orbit and circle back with cannon fire before a gunner could relocate his position. Cockpit armor plates surrounded the pilot. Maximum speed was roughly 320 miles per hour, but its cruise speed of about 120 knots matched the Jolly Green exactly. It was the only attack aircraft in theater that could actually fly formation with a rescue helicopter. Here is a number that reframes everything. The F-105 Thunder Chief's loss rate in Southeast Asia was 2.1 per thousand sorties. The A-1 had a loss rate of 1.7, lower than the Thud, despite flying exclusively at the altitudes where ground fire was densest. The call sign that defined the aircraft came from an accident. Captain J.W. Doc George Vidal of the USAF brought his Bien Hoa departure call sign with him when he transferred to U-Dorn as a combat search and rescue replacement pilot in late 1965. The call sign was Sandy. His successors inherited it. Within months, Sandy was the generic call sign for any Skyraider on rescue escort, and eventually the name for the most famous mission type of the air war. One Sandy pilot would fly his burning A-1 back to base with third-degree burns covering his face, arms, and hands, and then brief the debriefing officer on the survivor's exact location from the operating table. That story is coming. But first, what the Sandy mission actually looked like from the cockpit. By 1967, the Sandy doctrine had crystallized into a 4-ship package. Sandy 1, the senior pilot and the on-scene commander, flew low, authenticating the survivor by radio, pinpointing his position, assessing every threat, and running the entire task force. Jolly Greens, fighters, forward air controllers, and the HC-130 King Airborne Command Post. Sandy 2 flew low wing, suppressing fire and laying smoke. Sandys 3 and 4 orbited high, escorting the helicopters and holding ordnance in reserve to take over when the low pair got shot up. The signature tactic had a name that told you everything: trolling for fire. Sandy 1 and 2 flew low and slow over the suspected area, deliberately baiting enemy gunners into shooting, revealing their positions so the A-1s could kill them. Every Sandy sortie began by volunteering to be shot at. On the 10th of March, 1966, the Special Forces camp at Achau was being overrun by roughly 2,000 North Vietnamese Army regulars. An 800-foot ceiling sat on top of 1,500-foot surrounding peaks, so aircraft had to fly inside a bowl of enemy gun positions that were shooting down at them. 6 A-1Es from the 1st Air Commando Squadron arrived from Pleiku under call sign Hobo. Major Bernard Fisher was Hobo 5-1. His wingman, Captain Francisco Paco Vazquez, flew Hobo 5-2. A second pair from the 602nd Fighter Squadron joined from Queenon, Major Dafford Jump Myers as Surf 4-1, and Captain Hubert King as Surf 4-2. King's windscreen was shot out and he went home early. Myers was hit on a strafing run, his engine streaming fire. He belly landed on Achau's cratered airstrip, 2,500 feet of pierced steel planking fragments, 55-gallon drum shrapnel, and an unexploded 500-pound bomb, with North Vietnamese Army positions occupying the runway's north half. Fisher saw Myers scramble clear and take cover. A rescue helicopter was called, but Fisher calculated the helo would arrive too late and too exposed. He announced he was landing. The sound of pierced steel scraping under the belly of a 25,000-pound airplane. Fire from both ridgelines. Fisher overshot, braked hard, swung around, and taxied back through the debris. Myers, 46 years old, sprinted for the cockpit. Fisher later said the man ran faster than anyone he had ever seen. Fisher hauled him over the canopy rail into the back seat and took off through fire. 19 bullet holes in Fisher's aircraft. Vazquez took 23. The flight's total exceeded 200. Fisher's summary of why he landed was, "You just can't leave a guy there." He received the first living Medal of Honor of the Vietnam War, retired as a colonel, kept bees in Kuna, Idaho, and died of Parkinson's disease on the 16th of August, 2014. His A-1E, serial 52-132649, sits today at the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson. Fisher's rescue saved one man through one pilot's instinct. The Boxer 22 rescue, beginning the 5th of December 1969 near Ban Phanop, Laos, showed what it took when instinct was not enough. An F-4C went down. 336 sorties over 51 hours, 242 of them by A-1 Skyraiders. Captain Benjamin Danielson, Boxer 22 Alpha, was killed early on day 2 by North Vietnamese Army ground troops. First Lieutenant Woody Bergeron, Boxer 22 Bravo, was pulled out on day 3 by HH-3E Jolly Green 77 after 22 A-1s laid continuous cluster bomb and white phosphorus corridors around his position. The Nimbus 3 weather satellite recorded the smoke plumes from orbit. That was what it cost to get one man out. By April of 1972, the system was breaking. Lieutenant Colonel ICL Gene Hambleton's EB-66C went down to an SA-2 during the Easter offensive. The rescue lasted 11.5 days. Captain Peter Hayden Chapman II volunteered to fly Jolly Green 67 despite being short, because he was due to rotate home to the Presidential Airlift Squadron at Andrews. On the 6th of April, his helicopter took severe ground fire crossing the Song Mujang River. All 6 aboard were killed. General Creighton Abrams halted helicopter rescue attempts. Hambleton was eventually extracted on foot by Navy SEAL Lieutenant Thomas Norris and Vietnamese Navy Petty Officer 3rd Class Nguyen Van Kiet. The SA-7 Strela and massed anti-aircraft artillery had closed the window on everything the Sandy mission depended on. The tactical logic behind the A-1's dominance was geometry, not heroism, although the heroism was considerable. Every jet in theater could kill. Only the Skyraider could escort. It matched the helicopter's speed, stayed in the orbit, saw the muzzle flash, rolled in, and was back in position before the next gun opened up. The legend in the title of this video, that NVA commanders ordered their men never to fire at A-1 Skyraiders, is widely repeated in American veteran accounts. No primary source confirmation has surfaced. Not in captured documents, not in prisoner interrogations, not in post-war North Vietnamese memoirs. The tactical logic behind the story, however, is genuine and well documented. A slow, armored aircraft loitering at low altitude could triangulate muzzle flashes and return fire before a gunner could displace. Pulling the trigger on a Skyraider was often a death sentence. The same logic applied, possibly even more, to the OV-10 Bronco, O-1 Bird Dog, and O-2 Skymaster forward air control aircraft against which a similar fire discipline order is more commonly cited in Vietnamese tactical discussions. The Skyraider version of the story may be a conflation. It may be an inference pilots drew from the genuine pattern that troops held fire against their low passes until absolutely forced to engage. Either way, the SPAD earned the legend. Whether someone wrote it on paper is almost beside the point. The enemy adapted. Flak traps built around 23mm ZPU, 37mm, and 57mm anti-aircraft guns became standard along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The SA-7 Strela shoulder-fired missile in 1972 was the decisive change. The A-1 Skyraider's hot radial exhaust, low speed, and low altitude made it an almost ideal Strela target. Several first SOS hobos were lost to SA-7 missiles in April alone. And the aircraft was dying of old age. The R3350 radial engine leaked oil as a matter of biology, not maintenance failure. The 1957 production closure meant no new engines, no new airframes, and a spare parts pipeline that narrowed every month. By late 1972, the USAF had literally run out of flyable Skyraiders. 266 were lost in Southeast Asia, 201 were Air Force, 65 were Navy, 144 pilots were killed. The 602nd Special Operations Squadron alone lost 77 aircraft and 38 pilots before its inactivation at the end of 1970. Colonel William A. Jones III, commanding officer of that same 602nd, was flying his 98th combat mission as Sandy 01 in an A-1H, serial 52139-738, before dawn on the 1st of September 1968. 2 F-4D Phantoms had been hit near the Ban Karai Pass. One crew was already recovered. The second downed pilot was still on the ground. Jones made 10 to 12 low passes through karst valleys northwest of Dong Hoi. Anti-aircraft fire hit his aircraft. Smoke filled the cockpit. He continued. He spotted both the survivor and a multi-barrel gun position on a karst outcropping and rolled in with cannon and rockets. On his second attack pass, Rounds ignited the Yankee extraction system rocket mounted behind his headrest. The cockpit filled with fire. He pulled the extraction handle. The canopy jettisoned, but the rocket had already expended. He was not ejected. With severe burns to his face, arms, hands, neck, and shoulders, and with his radios destroyed, Jones refused orders to bail out. He flew the burning A-1 back to Nacon Phanom, landed it, and briefed the debriefing officer on the survivor's exact location from the operating table. The downed pilot was rescued later that day. Jones was promoted to full colonel, and his Medal of Honor was approved on the 14th of November, 1969. On the 15th of November, the next day, he took off from Woodbridge Airport, Virginia, in his personal Piper PA-20 Pacer. The engine failed. He spun in off the airport and died of third-degree burns in the crash. President Nixon presented the Medal of Honor posthumously to his widow. The Air Force built the A-1's replacement before the last Skyraider came home. The AX Program Office formed in 1966 as attrition mounted. Pierre Spray of the Office of the Secretary of Defense wrote the detailed specifications, drawing explicitly on interviews with A-1 combat pilots in Vietnam. The requirements read like a Skyraider wish list: long loiter, low speed maneuverability, extreme battle damage tolerance, massive cannon firepower. The 266 Skyraider losses were cited in A-10 requirement documents as justification for survivability standards. The Fairchild Republic A-10, Thunderbolt II, with 1,200 pounds of titanium armor, a 30mm cannon that defines the aircraft, and twin engines mounted for redundancy, is the A-1's direct descendant. It is now fighting its own phase-out debate. The argument never ends. What veterans remember is not the specifications. It is the sound. The deep, slow rumble of that 18-cylinder radial, unlike anything else in the theater. One writer put it plainly: to a downed American pilot, the growl of that massive piston-driven engine was the sound of angels singing. Ground troops remember the way an A-1 would arrive without warning and then stay. For an hour. For 2 hours. For as long as it took. The North Vietnamese army may or may not have issued a written order, but the men on the ground, on both sides, understood. When that sound appeared overhead, low and circling and patient, you stayed hidden or you died. The Skyraider earned the legend the hard way. Whether anyone wrote it down is the least important part of the story. Fisher's summary was the whole doctrine: you just can't leave a guy there. Everything else was engineering.